Hi, this is Misha. And about 2.5 years ago, we put out one of, honestly, our most watched videos, which we really are appreciative of that. It was on the Korean Daewoo series. I thought, let's revisit it, get a little more into maybe disassembly and such. But you know, it's just time. We've had the new camera, the new mic and everything, so thought we'd revisit the Daewoo family. So on the table, I've got the Daewoo Max 2, which is the semi-auto version of the K2. And the Daewoo Max 1, which is the semi-auto version of the K1A1. And we'll get into how these came to be and how they're different and similar. Also, I brought out, just for table candy, the DP51, which is this export version of Daewoo's K5 service pistol. Now this isn't actually going to be in this video, that's a different video, so if interested, check out the playlist. But it was nearby. So, after the Second World War, Korea was split into North and South, obviously the North going communist and is very much so still to this day, and the South allying with the West in being democratic. Its military was officially organized in 1948 and fought alongside Americans and other NATO allies during the Korean War until the ceasefire in 1953. It would be using a hodgepodge of guns, American M1 Grands and carbines, as well as submachine guns such as the Thompson and Grease gun. It would also be using some leftover Japanese guns, including some Arisakas officially reworked to fire 30-06, or as they just simply called it, 30 caliber US. By the 1960s, though, these guns were becoming quite obsolete. So in 1971, the Korean government, specifically the military, reached an agreement with Colt to establish a turnkey factory to produce a localized version of the Colt M16A1 known as the 603K, K for Korea, 603 being the Colt model designation for the A1 style with forward assist. It was very similar, but had just a few minor differences, and it was manufactured under license, under direct military control. The original agreement allowed Korea to produce just under 1.2 million rifles. However, it was not allowed to export or sell them commercially. They were only for their own use. And again, this was a complete turnkey Colt factory setup. So beginning in 1972 and running through 1984, this production would be fulfilled in Korea. However, by the late 70s, Colt's patents were expiring on the M16, and it fell under disagreements with Korea, and things kind of fell apart. This is why ultimately they did not continue and purchase rights to newer designs from that factory in America. Instead, they had the idea to make their own domestic guns, taking the best from the service rifles available in the world in the late 70s and 80s at the time. Also, the conglomerate known as Daewoo acquired the military small arms production factory, and that's how this company became involved with the license producing Colt factory setup in the early 70s in Korea. So this is where these things come together, and where both the K1 and then later K1A and K2 and many other designs ultimately arose from. Stop there for a sec. Daewoo K1.
Lower. Go ahead.
Mag has been sitting in the sun and it is quite warm. They seat pretty easily. Okay.
A little lower. Go ahead.
Held up in both times.
Some smoke rolling off that thing.
Probably the oil from when I last time we shot it.
Okay.
So to begin at the beginning, even in the early 70s, Korea knew that the M16 and the deal with Colt was pretty much a stopgap measure. It had a large military. It had a very hostile neighbor to the north, which it had continuous border skirmishes with, some of them even resulting in firing. And it wanted to have its own domestic arms production. Now, as I said, Daewoo, the company, would take over manufacturing, development and manufacturing of the M16A1, the 603K in the late 70s, and get involved in a new project in 1977, which is where the K1 and then K1A arose from. Before really wanting to get into a full-blown standard issue service rifle, they got their feet wet with essentially a submachine gun. Now, in 1972, many in the military requested development of a new submachine gun to replace the aging M3A1 grease gun and a few other things. Kind of, inspired by Colt's XM177 and that whole series, the 609, 610, 629, 630. You get the idea. Small, compact, yet still using standard magazines, standard parts, and having a short barrel. They would work on this using what they learned from producing the M16A1, and by 1980 have the XBK1 prototype. This was the first domestically designed gun to be tried by the military and eventually go into full production. It would go into production in 1981 as the K1, and then in 1982 it would receive a minor update. It would become the K1A. Now the A update is so small, that's why I'm just getting into it very quickly. They did introduce the option of 3-shot burst, which was becoming quite popular in the early 80s. They also updated the flash hider. They were having some troubles that they traced to the flash hider. When they went to the newer pattern, these disappeared. So what do we have here? We have a very compact gun. It weighs about 6¼ pounds. It is very AR-15-y. It has 2 receiver halves. We have on the military version, of course this is a civilian, folks, so we've got a longer thing here, and we'll get into the civilians later. But originally we would have a 10.5-inch barrel plus flash hider. We would have a 3-position wire stock, very much inspired by the one on the grease gun, collapsing in. When collapsed in, we're about 25 inches on the military version, and when fully extended, we're over 33 inches. So this stock actually has a very long, that's the middle, and this is full out, if I can do it here, this length of pull, even for an American. Middle is maybe a smidge short, but this was meant to be a subgun. This is rubberized and checkered for a good grip against the shoulder. We have a pistol grip very similar to an M16A1, but we have a storage compartment inside. It's very similar to the one found in the FAL. We have a simple aperture flip rear sight for essentially close and medium range. We have one large and one kind of small hole. There we go. It is windage adjustable, same as on the M16, for a tool or a bullet tip. No scope mount or anything, just smooth up here. We have a reciprocating cocking handle with last round hold open. We have a very M16 style, sorry my sling's in the way folks, safety that rotates. Originally it would be 3 position, later 4. You can actually rotate it either direction. It's kind of neat, makes a full circle. Very M16 style trigger group. And an M16 style gas piston, direct impingement gas system. Also the bolt is quite M16. The front sight, again very M16 with the ears, although sitting lower. This is adjustable for elevation. Sling swivel. This would not have a bayonet lug because submachine gun. We have pretty unique handguards, more or less doing their own thing. A little bit FAL inspired. The barrel is attached like on an AR. The lower has kind of the A1 style front pivot. Obviously it's different in the back. We don't have a buffer tube. Disassembly is here. And it fed from standard magazines. In the early days they would have been 20 rounders, later 30s. So the K1s would go into production in '81, and quickly the K1A update would come in with the new flash hider. And all older guns would be retrofitted with this flash hider. It increased reliability, it decreased muzzle flash, it helped with noise and concussion a bit, and it helped with parts wear. It cut down on breakages. Basically it just made everything a little smoother and less jarring. The whole idea behind this gun, it needed to be light, it needed to be more powerful, hence why it fires 5.56 NATO, than the 45 that the grease gun had been firing, and it needed to be cost effective to produce, hence why they took a lot of cues from the M16A1 on this. In fact, they took so many cues that Colt tried suing Korea and the Daewoo Corporation in the 80s and was not successful. But essentially it is very similar to the XM177 in the front with the direct impingement, short handguards, 10.5 inch barrel. The differences are really the rear sight not having a carry handle, and of course the buttstock, which is very, very grease gun style. After that initial teething period of going to the K1A, these were very well received and are still in service today. They are used by a lot of support troops, vehicle drivers, tank crews. They're also used by the Korean Marine Force, which is actually the largest Marine Force in Asia because Korea is a peninsula, so lots of water. These have seen extensive use during training and also use because Korea has always sent troops to support NATO actions around the world. And of course again, and a few border skirmishes with North Korea. So these have seen real world combat and very heavy training. They have been in production since the early 80s and are still, at least officially in production. They're definitely still in use to this day. So a neat little gun, and Korea's very first attempt at a domestic design. Granted, it's not all that original. but they were producing it themselves. They did R&D and testing themselves. So it had a certain place for being Korea's first. I guess our first always do, right? We'll move on. Well, the K1 was really the warm-up. The show was about the K2. In fact, this gun was ordered by Korea's then president in the mid-70s to go into development and production. They wanted to get away from the M16A1 as standard issue. They wanted to have their own domestic rifle. And this is the ultimate result. This went into development earlier than the K1. The K1 started around 1977. The K2, or what became the K2, began as early as 1974. And they went through many prototypes under the XB program. Ultimately, the prototype known as the XB6 was selected for further development as the best potential. This turned into the XB7, then the XB7C, and finally, this was renamed as the XK2 around 1981-82, that time frame. It would be tested out and officially introduced into Daewoo's catalog and announced as its future infantry rifle by the Republic of Korea military in 1984. So it actually went into production later. Now, even though it was announced in 84, these didn't start to be in, soldiers' hands and numbers to point out until around 1987, and it actually took them a good bit of time to re-equip. It takes time. They still had the M16A1. Basically, as these would wear out, they would replace them with the newer K2 as it became known. Now, whereas the K1A, was actually pretty close in a lot of ways, at least mechanically, to the M16A1, the K2 really was not, or is not. This is still standard issue today, much like how the K1A is still in service, the K2 is, although there have been some modernized versions. In fact, it's still officially in production. This fires 5.56 NATO. Early versions would have the 1 in 12 twist, much like the K1A, but soon they would actually go over to a 1 in 7.3 twist. A little bit different than standard NATO. Close, but a little bit different. We have an 18.3-inch barrel capped by a flash hider. Some people think these are put on crooked. They're not. They are cocked over to the side to work as a muzzle brake as well as a flash hider for right-handed shooters. This can also launch rifle grenades. It has a standard NATO bayonet lug. It will take a very similar clip-on bipod to the M16. Still have a pretty thin profile barrel. We have a fixed front sight. I'm going to point this at you. As you see, it's hooded. It has a night sight, tritium insert valve on the top. We have a 4-position gas regulator. The K1 had a direct impingement. The K2 uses a long stroke gas piston. However, their bolts are very similar. Handguards are not interchangeable, but again are quite similar. Lower receivers, upper receivers are quite similar, but again not interchangeable. They are different. This one has drilled and tapped holes on the top for attaching a rail or a scope. It has a more ornate rear sight, which is adjustable for range. It can go from 250 to 400 to 500 out to 600 meters to work with a longer barrel. We still have a reciprocating handle with last round hold open. Still have a very AR style trigger group and in the same pistol grip, M16A1 style, but with the storage compartment, very FAL style. Still have the same selector. They can rotate either way. Well, I guess when the hammer's back, but yeah. Sling swivels, of course, military guns, almost always have them. We feed from standard AR-15, M16, Stanag compatible mags, and we have this very excellent folding stock. It's relatively thick polymer with the curved rubber butt plate. It goes down and folds over like so. It's quite easy to deploy. You just push it down and pull it out, and it actually locks extremely well. With this stock out, we're at about 39 inches overall, so not bad for an 18-inch barrel. With it folded, we're at about 29. This weighs about 7¼ to 7½ pounds, depending on exact configuration. So again, not terribly heavy for a piston gun. That is thanks to the still lightweight barrel and the alloy receivers. It's a very, very well done gun. Compact, but not too compact. It's an excellent standard service weapon. The K1 was a great weapon for what it was designed for, but the K2 has served Korea very well from the 80s through today. As I said, there are some modernized versions. There is the K2A, which has rails. There's also the K2C, which has a shorter 12.5-inch barrel, so we lobbed off about 1/2 foot. But the K2 is still pretty much the standard. So let's get into some disassembly. Pop my mags out. One less thing to get in the way. You can always tell a military rifle by how easy they come apart. We need our stock out here. The stock actually removes very easily. And to open this, you just press this lever to hinge. Like so. So the trigger group inside. You just let it off. It doesn't go flying out at you. It's a captive spring. Set this aside for a second to show you the K2's system. Obviously this stock doesn't just pull off. You don't really need it to. It has a very similar, but it also has a locking latch. This was added a short time after production began. Flip it down, then you can press this all the way forward, and this is just to make sure it doesn't accidentally come out. Again, this was a standard issue, whereas the other one was kind of a more specialized gun. The trigger groups are virtually the same. The lowers are very similar, except for the different stock attachments. So let's look at the bolt group in this one. This is direct impingement, as I said. The reason they do not have a buffer tube, recoil spring, receiver extension, is they have a dual guide system here. It's all part of your takedown catch, nicely self-contained. Very well done. You pull this back, and like a lot of subguns, once it's in the rearest position, the handle comes right out. Here is our bolt group. It looks like a truncated M16. So we have a staked gas key. It's different here to work with the recoil. This fits around it, so it can press on them equally. The bolt is similar to M16 with a floating firing pin. It's not notched, obviously, because we don't have a forward assist to worry about. So let's look at the K2. We have a different spring. It's larger, single piece. This is that lock I was telling you about. Kind of keeps you see, from putting that little tab goes forward. That's what keeps you from disassembling it accidentally. Our bolt comes out the same handle. Now we're a little different. First, let's look at the bolt itself, the Bolton Carrier. It's quite similar, although no one's going to mix these up. The K2 is actually a little bit lighter. But of course, the big difference is this piston. As you see, it just comes right off. Some of these, both in the semi and the military, could be pinned together, but most are just held together by the receiver, which works just fine. Also gives you a point of flex and play. This could be a point of stress fracturing if it was all together as one piece. This comes out. And this is our long stroke piston. Very much inspired by, you could either say, the AK, or if you like, perhaps the FNC. I'll put it over here, didn't I? You can see how this fits in the back. Boop, like an AK would. Leaving, of course, just a hollow gas tube. As I said, this has a 4-position regulator up here. This is very much inspired by the FAL. Come on out, if it wants to. These can get frozen with the carbon quite easily. That's why they are removable, though, for cleaning. And mine's being a jerk, so I'll leave it in. I don't clean it often, but it's like on an FAL, but it has 4 positions. Notice it sits at a cant. If you have it in that middle position where it's vertical and you go to shoot it, it will go flying off. A lot of people like to attribute the K2 as a combination of AR-15 and AK-47, and it certainly is. However, it also takes some cues from the FNFAL or FNC, and even a few things such as that front sight from the HK series. This rear stock mechanism is very much like on the Galil or FAL paratrooper. So they really were just looking around and borrowing the best features they could find. And it worked well for them. The idea was they wanted the relative lightweight, accuracy, and quality sights of the AR, but they wanted the reliability, durability, and relative simplicity of the AK, which was in use at the time and still is today by North Korea, who would be South Korea's most likely adversary in all-out war. So they took what they wanted and they went from there. And again, these are both in service to this day. So what about the semi-autos before we complete things out here? Well, these are both early imports by Stoeger. As I said, my K1A is actually a Max I or Max 1 or Maxi. Some people say that's actually how it would be said. These are the first. They would do the Max 2 or Max II for the K2. And these would first appear in Stoeger's catalog in 1985 and be pretty quickly successful in America. They were reasonably priced, and especially for the quality. And then these would change very little over time. Actually extremely little considering the import run. Only with the selector markings changing a bit. And these are very close to their military cousins, except lacking full auto and a few other minor things to appease the BATF and customs. But they are extremely close to original. They would rebrand these, still being imported as Stoeger, to the K2 and the K1A1 a short time later. And then Stoeger would get out of the game and be replaced as the importer by IA Corporation out of California. IA would first import the K2 and the K1A1, and then they would have another name change. By the way, IA kind of got involved around 1987. Then they would have another name change around 1988 to AR100 for the K2 style, and AR110, so 110C for the K1A style. The first name change to the Ks was obviously to get them more associated with the Korean military version. The second change was kind of to start to appeal to the AR market, which was starting to develop in America at the time in the late 80s. Colt was getting more successful with its various AR-15s, and there you could still find the AR-180 and so on. So it was obviously a branding change. It's interesting because the AR-100s at least have a little oval machined out where it looks like they were originally stamped K2. They would machine it out very neatly and then restamp them with AR-100. And that would be it for the pre-ban. As we all know, to our chagrin, in 1989, President Bush signed a ban on so-called assault rifles from being imported, and that axed the K series, the Daewoos, because they obviously have way too many evil features, mostly the stocks and flash hiders and such. No one really knows how many were imported by Stoeger and IAC, but very, very rough, and I say very, guys, around 1,500 Max 1, K1A1, and AR-110Cs, so not a very large number. The Max 1, the K1 was never as popular. It wasn't quite as unique of a gun, and what they had to do, again, the military version had a 10-inch or 10.5-inch barrel. To make this legal, to get it to 16, they took an original style flash hider, pinned it on, and made the barrel about 13.5 inches, so when they're taken together, it's 16. I'm glad they did this as opposed to having a true 16-inch barrel and then having the flash hider on top of that. So at least they kept it as short as possible. But still, because it wasn't removable and it was just a direct impingement, it lost a little mystique. A lot of times people really like the K2 for being a gas piston, at least a few years ago. As to how many K2 styles came in, this is even harder to know. It seems like at least 2,500, maybe 3,000, but it wasn't a monumental number. I'm doing my best to estimate, of course, guys. Now, this wasn't the end of the Daewoo story. IAC would step out, and after the '89 ban, B. West would step in around 1990-1991, importing a ban-compliant version known as the DR200, which I bet most of you are pretty familiar with. Essentially, the DR200 is the same as this gun here, same high quality, made in Korea. The lower is slightly modified to have a slant cut on the bottom, and it comes with a thumb hole or butthole stock. And of course, the folding mechanism is completely gone. It can still accept standard mags though. The upper receiver is unchanged, including the holes for the scope if you wish to install one. Handguards and gas system are unchanged. Bayonet lug is of course machined off because that's evil. And instead of having a flash hider, we just have a basically fake device silver soldered on. It can be removed, and there are threads underneath though, so that's good. So really only you're missing the bayonet lug, pistol grip, and the whole folding stock thing. There was never a post-ban version of the K1 though. It ended in 1989. Again, it wasn't as popular, and it would have been more difficult to make it a ban-compliant version without making it look completely stupid. Honestly, they could have brought it in as a pistol, but no one was thinking about pistols at the time. That wasn't really the thing at the era. Anyway, so that was that. B. West would start importing. They would import through 94, 95, and then Kimber would take over. And they would import the DR200 in 5.56, 223. And they would add the DR300 in 7.62 by 39 Soviet caliber. Now there are issues with the DR300 that we don't have time for in this video, but you can Google it. They had some problems. They're really the only Daewoo that did, but it's because they were made for the commercial market. So Kimber would be the last importer, running through 97. And again, the government would step in. In late 97, the ATF, Customs, and the executive branch, the White House, President Clinton, reevaluated Bush's original 89 definition of an assault rifle and added the ability to accept high-capacity magazines to the list. So after 97, getting into 98, 99, guns started to come in with low-capacity magazine wells, and this is still in effect today. This was the end. They never imported a low-capacity version in the Daewoo series, unfortunately. So how many post-ban DRs came in? Again, we don't really know for sure, but it seems to be pretty equal the number of pre-bans with maybe a few more. It seems like about 3,000 to 4,000 90s era DR200s came in. I have no idea how many DR300s, so guys, sorry. And that was pretty much it. Daewoo's parent company, Daewoo Precision was the military arms division making these along with the military guns. The parent company, Daewoo, fell under hard times. In 1999, the whole thing was privatized because it had been under government supervision and support. Then the Daewoo Corporation would fall apart. Daewoo Precision would end up under the control of a new company called S&T Motiv. At first, we would have S&T Daewoo, but by 2012, the Daewoo name was dropped and we just had S&T. While they still support these weapons in the ROK today, they do not manufacture a semi-automatic version of either one for export sales or even domestic consumption. So the days of the semi-auto Daewoo K2 and K1 are well and truly over and don't look to return. So even if American laws improved for us There's just no more to be had from overseas, unfortunately. I really like these guns. That's why I can do these long videos on them. There's a lot to say great about them. Both are very reliable. We did a video last year comparing this to the Troy XM177 clone, so check that out for how we think it works at the range. This one has appeared in several of our other videos. We've even compared it to the Taiwanese T91, which is pretty interesting. They actually have a lot in common. The finish that they put on these, it's anodized, but it holds up very well. The barrels are chrome lined. They have a very good lifespan. The only thing is, some you'll get will have 1 in 12 twists, some will have 1 in 7.3, and it's kind of difficult to figure out which one you're getting. The early K2s and most of the K1s had the 1 in 12, but then they would switch over to the 7.3 in the late 80s, but then a lot of the DR200s would end up with 1 in 12 barrels again, but not all of them. So you kind of have to look at your own gun, and unfortunately the barrels aren't marked. So if you plan on buying these as a shooter, that's fine. Just try out both 55 and 62 grain to see which one works best, or, you know, check your twist weight. I hear a lot of people not wanting to shoot these for worrying about breaking parts, and my attitude is I've never really heard much about breaking parts. Now, aside from dropping them and things like that, of course, where you might break your furniture, but as far as internal wear, the good news is AR-15 fire control group components will work in these with minor modification. Firing pins aren't known for breaking, but even if they do, they are available. There's just not much to really go wrong, guys. It uses a spring-loaded ejector, an extractor that seem to hold up very well. The magazines, which would be the highest wear part on miniguns, are standard AR. And in fact, Korean 30-round AR mags like this are still coming in. So that's not an issue. These are threaded 1/28, so sound suppressors will work on these. And we even have an adjustable gas system, so that's great. I would definitely say take care of these. They're getting to be collectible and appreciated finally, but I would definitely not avoid shooting them. They're fantastic shooters. Smooth, nice triggers, good finishes. If you do your part and take generally decent care of it, it will not let you down. These things just don't tend to break, with the exception again of the DR300, which is its own little thing. You know, this bolt is extremely smooth on this Max 1. The trigger's pretty good. On this Max 2, the bolt's a little rougher. Not rough, I guess, just not as nice. But I'd say the trigger's better. They're both very nice guns, and they fit together very well. But they're very clearly military. Well, I thought it was time we revisited these. We'd love to hear you talk about your own Daewoos in the comments below. Also, if you like, check out our older video. There's a few interesting jokes in there. It was one of our first kind of videos we really put some production into, and we're very proud of it, but time has gone by. If you like, please click that button, and if you'd like to help support us, please click the link and check out our Patreon page. This is Misha, and we'll catch you next time.